Hey, it's Kyle here, and as my annual tradition is on this channel, with the start of the new year, I look back at the books I read in the previous year and kind of rank my favorite in regard to nonfiction and fiction. So in this video, I'll be talking about my favorite books that I read in 2019, nonfiction. Now the little caveat is this is not books that were necessarily published in 2019, they're just ones I read in 2019. So with that out of the way, here's my 5 favorite nonfiction books that I read in 2019. First up, number 5 is Explosion at Orly by Abrams. This is kind of more of a local history book that maybe discusses a historical event that a lot of people outside of the Atlanta area would not be aware of. And basically, this is a very transformative event in Atlanta's history in the middle part of the 20th century. So the basic driving force behind this event was in this period of Atlanta's history, there was a big art scene in the city, and there were a lot of very prominent families that were really trying to start huge fundraising efforts to kind of really get some great museums going for the arts. So as a part of this, they decided to organize a fundraising trip to France. And some side trips and elsewhere in Europe, but the main part of the trip was actually going to check out stuff in France. That's where the trip was starting and ending, if I remember correctly. And basically, this big fundraiser, people were buying these tickets, and this money would go back then to support the arts program in Atlanta. And that is also all these individuals who are going on the trip would be going to all these museums in France and elsewhere in Europe, and it would inspire them and show them the importance of arts and make them more likely to support the arts even more when they get back to Atlanta. So the trip went great. Very impressive. People had a great time. Then the chartered flight that was going to take the group back from Atlanta, from Paris to Atlanta, crashed on takeoff in France at their National Airport, Charles de Gaulle, sorry if I mispronounced that. At the time, it was the worst aviation crash in history in regard to the number of people that died. It was also very unique in the fact that it was a chartered crash from one city, that all the victims were from Atlanta, other than a couple of the plane crew from France. So usually you think of a plane crash as a tragedy, but usually the victims are spread out over an area. It's not one community that everybody's from. So this is a really devastating event in Atlanta history. It took out a lot of their leading individuals from that generation, but in some ways it led to positive aspects of history. And this group's honor a lot of individuals in Atlanta and Georgia and elsewhere in the country, and even France specifically, put a lot of effort and money towards developing the art scenes in Atlanta. So this tragedy did have one bright spot in really helping the arts flourish in the city. But it was a hugely tragic event, and it was very interesting to read this. I always heard about this, but I never really knew much about it and what behind the plane trip and the inspiration for it. So it's a very interesting book. I'm not sure if you're not from this area if you would really get the same impact out of it, but one reason I wanted to put this book on my list is a lot of people that read nonfiction really focus on these big national or worldwide historical events they read about. And there's a lot of really cool local history books that are published that a lot of times are not really circulated anywhere outside the local community that they're written about, the local bookstores or museums and stuff like that. So I'm going to encourage you, if you're into nonfiction, go to your local bookstores, your local museums, and see what local history books have been written. And read some of those, because they really will help you get to know more about your community where you live, and I think almost give you a stronger connection to that area once you kind of understand the history that shaped that community. So that's why this book made number 5 in my favorite nonfiction books that I read in 2019. Next up is SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard. Very fascinating look at the Roman Republic / Empire and kind of the transition from when it went to the Republic and what led to it becoming the Empire. I've always been interested by the history of Rome, and this book goes into the history of Rome in an insane amount of detail. The amount of research that went into this book is staggering. You're reading this, you can it comes across very easily how much work this author put into it. So if you're really into really very intensive, deep digging history books that really go into it more of an academic way and like examining all the elements of the history, I think this is a book you'll really enjoy. If you tend to enjoy nonfiction books that have more of a story aspect to it, this is probably not the book for you. But as somebody that enjoys the history of Rome, I really enjoyed SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard. Number 3 is Basketball Love Story by Jackie MacMullan, Rafe Barmayu, and Dan Flores. I butchered the second author's last name. I apologize for this. This book's kind of interesting. If anybody watches ESPN, you know, earlier in the year they ran this series of documentaries called Basketball, a love story. And this book is actually from that documentary. So the filmmakers basically conducted all these massive interviews to make this movie, and then they took the transcripts from those interviews and they kind of explored it more in this book. I grew up playing basketball my entire life. I've always loved basketball. So when I heard about this book, I was very interested in checking it out because they were talking about luckily basketball is such a new sport that a lot of the individuals that really helped gain it popularity in the 50s, 60s, 70s are still alive. So it's not like, baseball and football and soccer, other sports where a lot of the people that first made the sport big have been, dead for a long time. Basketball, a lot of those very important individuals are still alive. So it's very interesting to read kind of the early history of basketball when it first started kind of really bursting on the scene in America through the NBA and stuff like that. I really enjoyed it. So I think if you're into basketball, I would really recommend this book. It'll give you, a greater appreciation for the sport once you understand the history of it more. So Basketball Love Story was number 3 on my list. Number 2 is one of my favorite nonfiction authors, Erik Larson, and this is Thunderstruck. Thunderstruck kind of goes into the history of basically trying to wind in the early telecommunications efforts. So you're going into Marconi, obviously a very well-known inventor, and who's kind of creating this new means of telecommunications. Where basically you're doing wireless communication, and he's kind of pushing this envelope. And when he's first starting this, the idea that you can even talk from me to the camera and the audio would go was insane. And basically he was working towards the end of his career, basically sending messages from Europe to North America without cables. And that was a huge step forward in science. So it's going into that. At the same time, there's this murder mystery going on at the same time, and the book kind of explores how this new technology kind of plays a role in actually catching the murderers and stuff like that. So it's kind of these two little interesting stories going on at the same time and showing how a scientific invention can really impact all elements of human society, even in ways you wouldn't really think of. I'm sure when Marconi was working on this, he didn't really think of like, oh, my invention's going to help catch a murderer. But it did. So it's very interesting. The books I've read by Larson, this is probably my least favorite, but I still really, really enjoyed it. My favorite of his is The Devil in the White City, and then Isaac Storm is also really awesome. But I think if you've read Larson and you've enjoyed his other books and you haven't read Thunderstruck yet, I'd really recommend it. If you haven't read any of Larson's books, I'd recommend starting either with The Devil in the White City or Isaac Storm first before you got to Thunderstruck. And then lastly, my favorite nonfiction book I read in 2019 is actually another sports-inspired nonfiction book. It's King of the World, Muhammad Ali and the Rise of an American Hero by David Remnick. I've always been fascinated by Muhammad Ali and his background and his story. One of my favorite documentaries of all time, We Were Kings, I believe is the name of it, kind of covers his fight with Foreman in Africa. It's a fascinating documentary that I really love. But I've never really read a book about Ali, so it's very interesting to kind of read a lot about his... I knew very vague stuff about his childhood. I knew he was from Louisville, but kind of his background, what he went through as a kid, how that shaped him as an adult, how his conversion to Islam came about, how that really impacted him, how it impacted people around him, how it impacted the sport, how it impacted society. This is a really interesting book. So I would say you don't actually have to be a sports fan to really enjoy this book. If you're interested in the civil rights history, this book will be interesting to you. If you're interested just in the history of America, I would say from the 50s to 70s, this book gives you a great snapshot of what America was like in this period, and one of the individuals is a driving force behind a lot of the cultural changes behind it. So I really enjoy this book a lot. Since I've started this channel and doing these videos, this is the first time I've ever had a sports themed book claim the top spot in the nonfiction thing, but I really enjoyed King of the World, so I definitely recommend it. Comment section below, I'd really love you to give me some ideas of what some great nonfiction books were that you read in 2019. Maybe it's some stuff I haven't read before that I'll be putting on my to be read list and go get the books. And as always, also be sure to check out my video also for my 5 favorite fiction books. I'll be publishing that a few days after this one goes up, so keep an eye out for that. But hope you enjoyed the video. As always, like, comment, subscribe to the channel, all this sort of that good stuff. Sorry about some of the stuttering. I'm not sure why I was mumbling, but if you watch these videos, you know I do not like to edit, so those will stay right in. Hope you had a great 2019. Hope 2020 will be awesome for you, and happy reading.